Buddha times Marcus Aurelius. They agreed on everything, almost. On a winter night sometime around 172 AD, a man sat alone in a Roman military tent on the north bank of the Danube. His name was Marcus Aurelius. He was, by any measure, the most powerful person on earth. Outside the tent, his legions held the frontier against Germanic tribes who had been pushing south for a decade. Behind him, the plague that had already killed his co-emperor Lucius Verus was killing his soldiers. 5 to 10 million dead across the empire, roughly 1 in 10 of everyone alive in the Roman world. He had buried at least 7 of his 13 children. And by the light of an oil lamp, he opened a notebook and wrote to himself in Greek. What he wrote was never meant for us. He never published it. He never named it. He never even mentioned it to anyone, as far as we know. Centuries later, scholars gave it a Greek title, ta eis heauton, to himself. We call it the Meditations, a private journal written by an emperor in a war tent, not for posterity, not for students, not for the Senate, for himself, to keep himself sane, to keep himself decent, to remind himself night after night what kind of person he was trying to be. 600 years earlier and 4,000 miles east, a different man had walked away from exactly what Marcus could never escape: the throne, the palace, the inheritance, the power. He sat under a tree until he understood something he believed could end suffering. He never wrote it down either. His students remembered it, repeated it, and eventually, generations later, committed it to palm leaves. Marcus and the Buddha never met. They could not have. But what Marcus wrote in that tent and what the Buddha taught under that tree share a structural resemblance so close that it has launched 2,000 years of speculation. Tonight, we'll look at it honestly. One ruled the known world. One sat under a tree. They reached the same conclusion, sort of. Chapter 1. 2 Lives. That sort of is going to matter. Hold on to it. If you've encountered stoicism recently, and statistically many of you have, there's a good chance it came through Ryan Holiday. His books, The Obstacle is the Way, The Daily Stoic, Stillness is the Key, have made Marcus Aurelius a household name in a way that would have baffled Marcus himself. Holiday's framing tends toward convergence. All ancient wisdom traditions, he suggests, point in the same direction. That framing is exactly what this video will both acknowledge and complicate. Here's the reason many of you are here. What we're adding tonight is precision he doesn't have. And precision, as both Marcus and the Buddha knew, is where the interesting things live. But before we reach the philosophy, one historical question deserves an honest answer. Did these two traditions ever actually meet? The short answer is no. The longer answer is, they came remarkably close. Around 330 BC, 3 centuries before Marcus, 3 centuries after the Buddha, a Greek philosopher named Pyrrho traveled to India with Alexander's army. He encountered what Greek sources call naked wise men, almost certainly ascetics from one of India's contemplative traditions, possibly Buddhist, possibly Jain. Some scholars, most ambitiously Christopher Beckwith, have argued that this encounter shaped Greek skepticism itself. Others, like the reviewers in the Bryn Mawr Classical Review, find the evidence speculative, the honest verdict interesting but unproven. Pyrrho was not a Stoic. The line from Pyrrho to Marcus runs through several philosophical schools and several centuries of transformation. More vivid, in 2nd century Egypt, Marcus's own lifetime, archaeologists found a small marble Buddha at Berenike, a Roman port on the Red Sea. Buddhist merchants were trading in the Roman Empire while Marcus was emperor. Buddhist objects were physically present in his world. But there is no evidence, none, that Stoic philosophers and Buddhist monks ever sat in a room and compared notes. And here is what makes that absence more striking, not less. 2 centuries before Marcus, the Indian emperor Ashoka, a man who had done what Marcus could not, who had converted from conquest to conscience after the slaughter at Kalinga, sent Buddhist missions across the known world. His rock edicts, carved in stone and still standing, name 5 Hellenistic kings as recipients of the Dhamma. Ashoka's missionaries reached the borders of the Greek world. Buddhism came within arm's reach of the civilization that would produce Marcus Aurelius, and the philosophical encounter still did not happen, not because the ideas were incompatible, but because history, geography, and timing conspired to keep them apart. So what we are about to explore are not borrowings. They are not one tradition influencing the other. They are convergences, 2 traditions separated by 6 centuries and 4,000 miles, turning their attention to the same questions about the human mind and arriving, independently, at answers that are close enough to be instructive and different enough to be honest. That makes them more interesting, not less. And the first thing they converged on was not an idea, it was a method. Chapter 2: Daily Practice as Form. We tend to think of philosophy as something you study. You read it, you discuss it. Maybe, if you're particularly serious, you write a paper about it, but you don't do it. Not the way you do a morning run or a musical scale or a prayer. The French philosopher Pierre Hadot spent decades arguing that this is exactly wrong. That for the ancient Greeks and Romans, philosophy was never primarily a set of doctrines. It was a set of practices, exercises, things you did with your mind repeatedly, the way an athlete trains a body. And the Meditations, Hadot argued, is the clearest surviving example. Not a treatise, not a book of wisdom meant to be read once and understood. A practice journal, written by someone in the process of training himself to be a human being. Now, Hadot's reading is an argument. Not everyone in classical scholarship agrees with it. But if you actually sit down and read the Meditations cover to cover, something becomes obvious that no scholarly debate can obscure. Marcus repeats himself, constantly. He returns to the same ideas: impermanence, the smallness of human affairs, the discipline of judgment. Not because he forgot he already said them, but because saying them once was never the point. The repetition is the practice. He's doing reps. Consider what that means. The most powerful man in the Roman world, in a tent on the edge of civilization, opens his journal and writes again, a reminder he has written dozens of times before. Not because the insight is new, because the insight needs to be re-entered, re-inhabited, brought back from abstraction into the texture of tonight, this specific night, with the plague outside and the war unfinished and another child buried. Marcus himself gives us the method. In Meditations 2.11, he writes, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That is not a philosophical proposition to be debated. It is an instruction. Do this now, tonight, and tomorrow night, do it again." 4,000 miles east and 6 centuries earlier, the Buddha had built an entire system around the same structural insight, that understanding without practice is not understanding at all. The Satipatthana Sutta, MEN 10, the discourse on the foundations of mindfulness, is not a text you read and absorb, it is a text you do. 4 domains of continuous attention: body, feeling tone, mind states, and mental qualities. each one practiced repeatedly, daily, across years. The suttas refrain. One abides contemplating the body as body, ardent, clearly knowing, mindful. Repeats with variations dozens of times. The repetition is not redundancy. It is the form. And like Marcus, the Buddha made death practice central. Not peripheral, not optional, but structurally necessary. The Maranasati Sutta, A.N. 6.19, records the Buddha asking his monks how often they contemplate death. One says, once a day. Another says, at every meal. The Buddha tells them all the same thing. Too infrequent. The practitioner should contemplate death with every breath, not as morbidity, as precision, as a way of burning away everything that does not matter so that what remains is what actually matters. Marcus, writing in his tent, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." The Buddha, teaching his monks, contemplate death with every in-breath and every out-breath. Two men, two traditions, no contact between them. And they arrived at the same structural discovery, that philosophy, or wisdom, or practice, or whatever you want to call the thing that makes a human life examined rather than merely lived, requires repetition, daily repetition, not because you are slow to learn, but because the mind drifts, because the tent is cold, and the war is long, and grief accumulates, and the easiest thing in the world is to stop paying attention to how you are living. This is the interpretive frame for everything that follows tonight. When we compare what Marcus and the Buddha said about control, about impermanence, about emotion, we are not comparing two sets of propositions. We are comparing two sets of exercises, two daily practices, two men, one in a tent, one under a tree, who discovered that the gap between knowing something and living it can only be closed by doing the work every single day. And once you see that both traditions are fundamentally about practice, not theory, the next question becomes sharper. Because if the method is practice, the question is, practice aimed at what? What exactly are you training your mind to do? Both traditions had an answer, and it began with a deceptively simple distinction, the difference between what you can change and what you cannot. Chapter 3. What is actually under your control? There is a line that has survived 20 centuries and still works. It comes not from Marcus, but from his teacher, or rather, from the teacher of his teacher, Epictetus, a former slave who became the most influential Stoic philosopher of the Roman period. Marcus never met him. Epictetus died before Marcus reached adulthood. But Marcus owned his discourses, studied them under his tutor Rusticus, and thanks Rusticus explicitly in the first book of the Meditations for introducing him to Epictetus's work. Here is what Epictetus taught in the opening line of the Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others are not. Things in our control: opinion, intention, desire, aversion. Things not in our control: body, property, reputation, command. Everything turns on learning to distinguish between the two. This is the concept the Stoics called prohairesis, the faculty of choice, the domain of what is genuinely yours. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around it, and Marcus inherited it and lived inside it for 20 years of war and plague and grief. In Meditations 8.47, Marcus writes, "External things are not the problem. It's your assessment of them, which you can erase right now." Read that again. Not, external things don't matter. Not, pretend the plague isn't killing your soldiers. But the suffering that external things cause you, that is produced not by the event, but by the judgment you attach to the event. And that judgment is within the domain of prohoresis. It is yours. You can revise it. This is not a minor philosophical point. It is. As Albert Ellis in 1962 and Aaron Beck in 1976 both recognized when they built cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most consequential ideas in the history of Western thought. Both men explicitly credited Epictetus. The Enchiridian's central claim that we are disturbed not by events, but by our opinions about events, became the founding axiom of modern psychotherapy. Now, 6 centuries earlier, the Buddha, teaching in the Jeta Grove, the Salata Sutta, S. NN 36.6, the Discourse on the Arrow, presents one of the most precise analogies in the entire Pali Canon. The Buddha says, when an untrained person experiences pain, they feel 2 feelings, a bodily feeling and a mental feeling. It is as if they were struck by 2 arrows. The first arrow is the pain itself, the bodily sensation, the event, the thing that happened. The second arrow is the reaction, the anguish, the resistance, the story the mind tells about the pain. The trained disciple, the Buddha says, feels only one. The first arrow still lands, the body still hurts, the loss still occurred. But the second arrow, the mental elaboration, the suffering layered on top of pain, that arrow is optional. The trained mind does not fire it. Marcus, in his tent, external things are not the problem. It is your assessment. The Buddha, in the Jeta Grove, the first arrow is unavoidable. The second arrow is your own. The structural parallel is so close that scholars have noted it for over a century, and for good reason. Both traditions locate human freedom not in controlling events, but in the relationship between the mind and events. Both say, the lever is upstream. Pull it there, and the downstream experience changes. But here is where precision matters. Where the sort of we are carrying through this video earns its keep. Epictetus frames the distinction as epistemic. It is a matter of correct judgment. Replace the false judgment. Death is terrible, with the accurate one. Death is not in my control and therefore not my concern. And the destructive emotion ceases. The mechanism is rational. You think your way to freedom. The Buddha frames it differently. The Dhammapada opens with 2 verses, DHP 1-2, that have been called the most important lines in the entire canon. Mind is the forerunner of all actions. All deeds are led by mind, created by mind. The Pali word is manomaya, mind-made, not merely evaluated by mind, not merely judged by mind, constituted by mind. Experience is not a neutral event that the mind then assesses correctly or incorrectly. Experience is something the mind participates in making. 2 traditions agree the lever is upstream. They disagree about how far upstream. For the Stoic, you change your opinion about the event. For the Buddhist, you investigate how the mind is constructing the event in the first place. Opinion is one layer. Construction goes deeper. This distinction is not academic. It shapes what practice looks like. The Stoic practitioner sits with a journal and corrects judgments. The Buddhist practitioner sits in meditation and watches, moment by moment, how experience is being assembled by attention, perception, intention, and contact. The 4 right efforts, SN. 45.8. The Buddhist training in what to cultivate and what to abandon. Focus precisely on this. Not controlling external events, not even correcting opinions about events, but shaping the mental qualities that determine how experience arises in the first place. And there is one more parallel worth holding. The 5th of the Buddha's 5 remembrances, AN 5.57. 5 truths a practitioner is meant to reflect on daily, reads, I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbitrator. Whatever I do, for good or for evil, to that will I fall heir. Everything else, youth, health, life, the company of loved ones, the first 4 remembrances strip away. Only your actions remain truly yours. Epictetus, opinion, intention, desire, aversion. These are yours. Everything else is not. The Buddha, your actions, what you do with your mind and body. These are yours. Everything else passes. 2 men drawing the same circle around a different center. Epictetus draws it around judgment. The Buddha draws it around action, specifically around intention, which in the Buddhist analysis is the seed of kamma. Both circles exclude the external world. Both circles say, freedom lives here, inside this boundary, nowhere else. But the external world has one feature that neither tradition can exclude from its analysis. One fact that presses against every philosophy of control, every exercise in equanimity, every attempt to separate what is yours from what is not. Everything changes, nothing lasts. And both Marcus and the Buddha knew this, not as a melancholy observation, but as the foundation of everything else they taught. Chapter 4. How do we live with impermanence? Marcus Aurelius had a habit that might strike a modern reader as morbid. He made lists of dead people. In Meditations 4.48, he catalogues them. The court of Hadrian, dead. The court of Antoninus, his adoptive father, dead. The court of Alexander, dead. The court of Philip, dead. Then he widens the lens. The philosophers, dead. The astronomers who predicted eclipses, dead. The physicians who furrowed their brows over the dying, dead themselves. People who mourned, people who were mourned, people who eulogized, and people who were eulogized. Entire generations, entire civilizations. Where are they now? Marcus writes, and the answer he gives himself is 2 words: smoke and ash. This is not depression. This is not nihilism. This is a man in a military tent, surrounded by plague and war, deliberately doing something with his attention. He is training himself to see clearly, because the entry that follows is not despair, it is instruction. Live this brief life rightly. That is what the dead teach the living, not sadness, proportion. He returns to this theme more than any other. In Meditations 5.23, keep in mind how fast things pass by and are gone. Existence flows past us like a river. The what is in constant flux. The why has 1,000 variations. In 7.56, perhaps the most famous line in the entire text, think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly. Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left. The logic is counterintuitive but precise. Marcus is not saying, you're going to die, so nothing matters. He is saying, you're going to die, so stop postponing. Whatever time remains, and there is no way to know how much, belongs to the question of how to live, not whether to live. Death is not the enemy. Delay is the enemy, and the awareness of death is the cure for delay. Now, here is where the Buddhist tradition takes the same observation and does something that Marcus never did, something structurally different and arguably more radical. For Marcus, impermanence is clarifying. It strips away the unnecessary so that what remains, virtue, duty, the present moment, stands in sharper relief. But the self that sees the clarity remains. Marcus watches the river. He stands on the bank. The river flows past. Marcus endures. He's impermanent in the sense that he will eventually die. But until then, there is a he, a hegemonikon, a ruling faculty, a rational center, watching the impermanence of everything else. The Buddha's analysis of impermanence does not leave you standing on the bank. Anicca, the Pali word for impermanence, is one of the three characteristics of all conditioned existence, alongside dukkha and anatta. And the crucial Buddhist move is that these three are not separate observations. They are structurally linked. Impermanence is not simply a fact about the external world, that rivers flow, that empires fall, that people die. Impermanence is a fact about you, about the body you identify with, the feelings you take to be yours, the perceptions, the intentions, the consciousness you call I. In the Phenapindupama Sutta, SN 22.95, the Buddha uses 5 similes, one for each of the 5 aggregates that constitute what we call a person. Form is like a lump of foam. Feeling is like a water bubble. Perception is like a mirage. Mental formations are like a plantain trunk. Layers with no core. Consciousness is like a magic trick. None of them solid, none of them stable, none of them self. For the Stoic, impermanence says, the world around you is passing. Live well while you can. For the Buddhist, impermanence says, the thing you call you is also passing, and seeing that clearly is not loss. It is the beginning of freedom. This is where impermanence becomes the gateway to anatta, not self. Marcus's impermanence consoles a self that remains. The Buddha's impermanence dissolves the self that suffers. We will return to this disagreement in full. But the structural difference is already visible here, inside what looked like a shared observation. And yet, and this is what makes the comparison honest rather than merely tidy, both men arrived at the same practical conclusion, not the same metaphysics, the same response, because there was a king. His name was Pasenadi, and he ruled the kingdom of Kosala during the Buddha's lifetime. Not a monk, not a renunciant, a ruler with armies and ministers and territory and all the problems that Marcus would inherit 6 centuries later on the other side of the world. Pasenadi visited the Buddha repeatedly. The Kosala Samyutta, the 3rd book of the Samyutta Nikaya, preserves 25 conversations between them. A king and a teacher, a man who could not walk away from power, learning from a man who had. In one of those conversations, SN 3.25, Pasenadi describes a vision. 4 great mountains from the east, west, north and south are rolling toward each other, crushing everything between them. All living beings, all human achievement, everything flattened. What would you do, the Buddha asks, in the face of such a catastrophe? What could anyone do? And the Buddha's answer is, just so, great king, aging and death roll in upon all beings. When you are overcome by aging and death, what else is there to do? The only fitting response is to practice the Dhamma, to practice morality, to do skillful and good actions. A king receiving this teaching, not in a monastery, not after renouncing his throne, in his palace mid-reign, with the weight of a kingdom on him. Hearing from the Buddha what Marcus would write to himself in a tent 600 years later, you are going to die. Everyone you rule is going to die. The mountains are coming. And the only sane response is not panic, not denial, not distraction, but doing what is right now with whatever time the mountains have left you. Marcus in Meditations 4.48, cataloguing dead emperors. Where are they now? Smoke and ash. Pasenadi in the Jeta Grove, hearing about 4 mountains. Aging and death roll in upon all beings. Marcus's conclusion, live this brief life rightly. The Buddha's instruction, practice the Dhamma, do skillful actions. 2 rulers, 2 traditions, Two men who could not escape the weight of the world. And the same answer. Not transcendence, not escape, but right action in the face of death. The metaphysics behind that answer. What right means, what action means, what happens after death. Those are genuinely different. We will get there. But the lived response, the thing a person actually does when they close the journal or rise from the audience with the teacher, that is remarkably, stubbornly, almost suspiciously the same. There is one question left before we turn to the disagreements, and it may be the hardest, because control and impermanence are, in a sense, intellectual problems. You can reason your way through them, but the next question is not intellectual. It is emotional. It is the question that separates the Stoic who has read the Enchiridion from the Stoic who has actually tried to live by it. It is the question the Buddha's monks asked after the teaching was clear and the practice was established and the impermanence was understood. How should I feel? Chapter 5. How should we feel? Here is where most popular comparisons between Stoicism and Buddhism go wrong, and they go wrong in the same direction every time, by making both traditions sound colder than they are. The Stoic term is apatheia. If you hear the English word apathy inside it, you are not alone, and you are also not correct. This is one of the most consequential mistranslations in the history of Western philosophy. Apatheia does not mean the absence of all feeling. It means freedom from patha, and patha, in Stoic technical vocabulary, does not mean emotions the way we use that word. It means something closer to passions, specifically the destructive kind, the irrational movements of the soul that arise from false judgments about what is good and what is bad, grief that overwhelms you because you judge death to be the worst thing that can happen. That is pathos. Rage that consumes you because you judge an insult to be intolerable. Pathos. The desperate craving for wealth because you judge money to be the highest good. Pathos. In every case, the Stoic diagnosis is the same. The emotion is not a feeling that arrived from outside. It is a judgment you made, incorrectly, about what matters. Correct the judgment, and the destructive emotion dissolves. Not because you have suppressed it, because you have removed the error that was generating it, but, and this is what the popular version of Stoicism consistently misses, the Stoics did not stop there. They had a second category, upekkha, the good feelings, rational joy, kara, rational caution, eulabia, rational wishing, bulissis. These are not suppressed. These are not eliminated. These are retained, because they arise not from false judgments, but from accurate ones. The Stoic sage is not a stone. The Stoic sage feels deeply, but feels accurately. Joy at what is genuinely good. Caution toward what is genuinely dangerous. Wishing for what is genuinely worth pursuing. Marcus in Meditations 4.49. To be like the rock that waves keep crashing over. It stands unmoved, and the raging of the sea falls still around it. But notice, the rock is not dead. The rock is not indifferent. The rock is stable. It has a position. It holds. The sea rages. The rock does not rage back. That is not the same as not feeling the sea. Now, the Buddhist counterpart. The Pali word is upekkha, equanimity, and like apatheia, it has been catastrophically misunderstood. Upekkha does not mean detachment. It does not mean not caring. It means, and this is precise, the capacity to remain balanced in the face of gain and loss, praise and blame, pleasure and pain, fame and disrepute. The 8 worldly winds. Upekkha is the mind that doesn't get blown around, but here is the structural difference that matters. In Stoic architecture, apatheia stands more or less alone. the upekkha, are its companions, but they are described as consequences of correct judgment, not as practices cultivated alongside apatheia in a deliberate structure. You arrive at good feelings by arriving at correct thinking. The warmth is real, but it is a byproduct. In Buddhist architecture, upekkha does not stand alone. It cannot. It is the fourth of the four Brahma-vihara, the four immeasurable qualities, and its position in that sequence is not arbitrary. First, metta, loving kindness, the wish that all beings be happy. Second, karuna, compassion, the wish that all beings be free from suffering. Third, mudita, sympathetic joy, genuine gladness at the happiness and success of others. Fourth, upekkha, equanimity, the balanced mind that does not waver. The sequence matters. You do not start with equanimity. You start with warmth. You cultivate loving kindness until it becomes boundless. You cultivate compassion until it includes everyone. Not just the people you like, not just the people who deserve it, everyone. You cultivate joy in the good fortune of others until envy has no foothold. And then, only then, you cultivate equanimity, not as coldness, as the stable platform from which the other three can operate without burning out. Equanimity, without the first three Brahma-vihara, is indifference. The Buddha was explicit about this. The near enemy of upekkha, the state that looks like equanimity but is not, is precisely indifference. The practice tradition guards against this by placing upekkha last, structurally dependent on the warmth that precedes it. So both traditions arrive at a state that a casual observer might describe as calm. Both produce practitioners who do not panic, who do not rage, who meet difficulty with something that looks like composure. But the architecture that produces that calm is different. The Stoic gets there through the mind. Correct your judgments. Eliminate the false ones. What remains, the upekkha, will include warmth, but warmth generated by accurate thinking. The system trusts reason to produce appropriate feeling. If the practitioner turns cold, if the rock becomes truly dead, the system has no structural correction. That is the practitioner's problem, not the philosophy's. Warmth is available, but not guaranteed. The Buddhist gets there through the heart, and then through the mind. Cultivate warmth first. Build the foundation of metta and karuna until it is unshakable. Then add the equanimity that prevents that warmth from becoming attachment, from becoming favoritism, from becoming the kind of caring that collapses under its own weight. The system builds warmth in before equanimity arrives. If the practitioner turns cold, the architecture itself flags the error. You have skipped steps. Go back. Start with metta again. Same destination. Composure in the face of difficulty. Different routes. Different structural protections. And, if we are honest, different failure modes. The Stoic failure mode is coldness. A person who has mastered apatheia but never developed upekkha, who has eliminated destructive passions but not cultivated good ones. Marcus himself may have struggled with this. There are passages in the Meditations. The people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, that sound less like equanimity than exhaustion. The system does not prevent this. It makes warmth available. It does not make warmth mandatory. The Buddhist failure mode is different. It is spiritual bypassing, using equanimity as a mask for avoidance, using non-attachment as permission to disengage. The Brahma-vihara sequence is designed to prevent exactly this. But design and execution are not the same thing, and the Buddhist tradition has its own long history of practitioners who achieved calm without achieving compassion. Neither tradition solved the problem perfectly, Both saw it clearly, and both, in their own architecture, with their own tools, tried to build a practice that keeps the heart warm while keeping the mind steady. That is the fourth convergence, and it is perhaps the most human one. Because the question, how should I feel, is not a philosophical abstraction. It is the question you ask yourself at 3 a.m. when you cannot sleep, when someone you love is suffering and you cannot fix it, when the news is terrible and you have to decide whether to feel everything or feel nothing. Marcus, alone in his tent, with the plague outside, choosing to feel, but choosing to feel accurately. The Buddha, teaching his monks to begin with boundless love and end with unshakable balance. 2 answers, same question, both honest, both incomplete. And now, having seen where they converge, it is time to see where they do not. Chapter 6. 3 Honest Disagreements. Up to this point, we have been tracing convergences, and the convergences are real. Daily practice, the upstream lever of the mind, impermanence as clarifying, equanimity as achievement. These are not superficial resemblances. They are structural, deep, and independently discovered. If the video ended here, you would walk away thinking these 2 traditions are essentially the same project in different languages. They are not, and the differences are not minor. They are not edge cases or footnotes. They are disagreements about fundamental questions. What an emotion is, what a self is, and what a human life is for. If we are going to take both traditions seriously, we owe them the honesty of seeing where they part ways. Disagreement 1. What is an emotion, and what do you do with it? We touched this in the last section, but now we need to go deeper, because the Stoic and Buddhist answers to this question are not 2 versions of the same answer. They are 2 different answers. The Stoic position is clean and radical. An emotion, apatheia, is a false judgment, not accompanied by a false judgment, not triggered by a false judgment. It is a false judgment. When you feel rage, what is actually happening, according to Epictetus and Marcus and the entire Stoic tradition, is that you have judged something, an insult, a loss, an obstacle, to be bad in a way that it is not. Correct the judgment, and the emotion does not merely subside, it ceases to exist, because the emotion was the judgment. There is nothing left over. This is why Stoic practice is fundamentally cognitive. You reason your way out. You examine the judgment. You test it against the Stoic framework. Is this thing actually in my control? Is it actually bad? Or have I confused an external event with my assessment of it? The Meditations is full of Marcus doing exactly this in real time. He catches himself. He corrects. He reminds himself, again, that the judgment was false and that the emotion it produced was therefore unwarranted. The Buddhist analysis starts in what looks like the same place, but arrives somewhere different. In the Buddhist framework, an emotion is not a judgment. It is a process, a sequence of events, contact, feeling tone, perception, intention, reaction, that arises, persists, and passes away. It is not one thing. It is a cascade. And the practice is not to correct a judgment within the cascade, but to see the cascade clearly, to watch it arise, to watch it persist, to watch it pass, without adding the second arrow, without clinging to the pleasant ones or pushing away the unpleasant ones, without identifying with any of them as mine. The practical difference is not trivial. It produces different practitioners. The Stoic practitioner who has mastered this discipline might say, I no longer feel grief because I no longer judge death as bad. Death is natural. It is not in my control. My grief was an error and I have corrected it. The Buddhist practitioner who has mastered this discipline might say, "Grief still arises. I see it arise. I do not cling to it. It passes. I am not diminished by its arising, and I am not improved by its passing. It was never mine," as Antonio Maccaro puts it in More Than Happiness. They get to similar behavior by different routes. Both practitioners meet loss with composure. Both function. Both continue. But one has eliminated the grief through rational correction. The other has released the grief through clear observation. The Stoic fixed a mistake. The Buddhist let go of an impermanent process. Neither approach is obviously superior. The Stoic approach has the advantage of precision. You can articulate exactly which judgment was false and why. The Buddhist approach has the advantage of flexibility. It works even when the emotion is not neatly reducible to a single judgment, which, if you have ever actually grieved, you know is most of the time. And both approaches have a shadow. The Stoic shadow is the risk of intellectualizing pain, of declaring grief irrational before you have actually felt it. The Buddhist shadow is the risk of observing pain from such a distance that you never fully engage with what it means. Both traditions know about their own shadows. Neither has fully solved them. Disagreement 2. What kind of thing is a person? This is the deepest disagreement between the two traditions. Everything else, practice, emotion, ethics, ultimately rests on this question, and the answers are not compatible. The Stoic project requires a self, not an ego in the modern psychological sense. Something more precise. The hegemonikon, the ruling faculty, the rational center of a human being, the inner sovereign that receives impressions from the world, evaluates them, assents to some, rejects others, and directs action accordingly. It is what Marcus is writing to in the Meditations. It is what Epictetus is training in the Discourses. Without it, the entire Stoic project collapses. Because if there is no unified rational center that can correct its own judgments, then the instruction, correct your judgment, has no one to follow it. The hegemonikon is not the body. It is not reputation. It is not property or power. Those are externals. The hegemonikon is you, the irreducible core that persists through change, that can improve through training, that bears responsibility for its choices. Marcus addresses it directly, repeatedly, as though speaking to a recalcitrant friend. Wake up, pay attention, remember what you know, do better. The Buddhist tradition looks at this same question and gives an answer that the Stoic tradition cannot absorb: anatta, not self. The teaching that runs through the entire Pali Canon, from the second discourse the Buddha ever gave, says N 22.59, the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, to the final instruction before his passing. 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, consciousness, each one impermanent, each one unsatisfactory, each one not self. Form is not self. If form were self, it would not lead to affliction. The same formula repeated for each aggregate. Nothing left over, no residual core, no hegemonikon. Now, this is where honest scholarship requires a flag. The Buddhist tradition itself is not entirely unified on what anatta means. Thanissaro Bhikkhu, one of the most influential living translators of the Pali Canon, reads anatta as primarily strategic. The Buddha, in this reading, is not making a metaphysical claim that the self does not exist. He is making a practical recommendation. Do not identify anything as self, because identification is the mechanism of clinging, and clinging is the mechanism of suffering. Anatta is a tool for liberation, not a statement about ultimate reality. When the wanderer Vacchagotta asks the Buddha directly, "Is there a self? Is there no self?" The Buddha remains silent. S. M. May Sen, 44.10. Thanissaro reads this silence as deliberate. The question itself is a trap, and answering it in either direction would obstruct practice. Bhikkhu Bodhi, another major translator and scholar, reads anatta more ontologically. The five aggregates exhaust what a person is. None of them is self. There is no residual self outside the aggregates. The silence with Vacchagotta, in Bodhi's reading, is compassionate pedagogy, not metaphysical agnosticism. This is a live scholarly debate. It has not been resolved. It may not be resolvable. And for our purposes tonight, the important point is this. On either reading, the Buddhist analysis creates a fundamental problem for the Stoic project. If anatta is strategic, if the practice is to stop identifying with any aggregate as self, then the hegemonikon, the rational center that Marcus trains and addresses and relies upon, is precisely the kind of identification the Buddhist practice is designed to dissolve. You cannot correct your judgments if the thing doing the correcting is itself an object of disidentification. If anatta is ontological, if there genuinely is no self to be found, then the hegemonikon is not just unhelpful. It is a fiction, a useful fiction perhaps. Marcus's entire meditations might be read as a magnificently productive conversation with an entity that does not exist, but a fiction nonetheless. The honest verdict, and it is honest precisely because it does not try to resolve what 2.5 millennia of Buddhist scholarship have not resolved, is this. The Buddha and Marcus disagree about what kind of thing a person is. The Stoic project presupposes a unified self that can be trained. The Buddhist project, on its strict reading, dissolves the very entity that the Stoic project presupposes. This is not a disagreement that can be papered over with, they're both saying the same thing in different words. They are not, and taking both traditions seriously means sitting with that. Disagreement. 3. What is a human life for? Marcus Aurelius knew what he was doing. He says it plainly. In the Staniforth translation of Meditations 10.16, perhaps the most quoted line in the entire text, waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one, this life, this one. The tent, the plague, the frontier, the grief, the duty. Live it truthfully, live it rightly, and when death comes, and it will come, Marcus reminds himself constantly, you dissolve back into the cosmic substance from which you arose. The Logos reclaims its material. There is no second life. There is no cycle. There is no escape because there is nothing to escape from. There is only this, the brief interval between emergence and dissolution, and the question of whether you used it well. This is the Stoic telos, virtue in this life, duty fulfilled, the rational order of the cosmos participated in, not transcended. Marcus does not want to leave the world. He wants to live in it, awake, decent, undistracted by false judgments, for as long as the world allows. The Buddhist telos, as traditionally taught, points somewhere else. The path the Buddha laid out, the Noble Eightfold Path, the training in Sila, Samadhi and Panya, leads toward Nibbana, the cessation of suffering, liberation from samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that, in the Buddhist cosmology, is not a metaphor. It is the structure of existence, and the goal of practice is not to live one life well. It is to see through the process that generates life after life after life, to reach, as the Udana puts it, the unborn, the unmade, the unconditioned, Ud 8.1. Now, modern secular Buddhism often brackets rebirth. Many Western practitioners are drawn to the Buddha's psychology, his ethics, his meditation techniques, without accepting the cosmological framework in which those teachings were originally embedded. This is a legitimate contemporary approach. It is also contested within Buddhism itself. And for the purposes of an honest comparison, what matters is the canonical teaching. The teaching as the Buddha gave it, not as it has been adapted. And the canonical teaching is clear. The destinations are different. Marcus wants to live this life well and accepts dissolution at the end. The Buddha teaches a path that leads beyond the cycle of life and death entirely. Marcus finds meaning in the finite. The Buddha finds liberation from the finite. One looks at the brevity of life and says, "Therefore, waste no time." The other looks at the brevity of life and says, "Therefore, understand why you keep being born." This is not a disagreement that either tradition needs to win. It is a disagreement that illuminates both. Because Marcus's project, virtue in this life, duty to the cosmos, acceptance of death, has a dignity and a practicality that does not require a cosmology of rebirth to motivate it. And the Buddha's project, liberation from the cycle, the cessation of the craving that drives rebirth, has a depth and a radicalism that Marcus's framework cannot reach. They are not the same destination. They are both, in their own terms, coherent, and you do not have to choose between them tonight. What you might notice is this: both projects, despite pointing in different directions, produce the same instruction for this moment, for right now. Live with attention, act with integrity, do not waste time. Whatever the ultimate destination, dissolution into cosmic substance or liberation from the cycle, the proximate instruction is the same. Be present, be decent, practice daily, and do not wait. That convergence of practice, despite divergence of purpose, is perhaps the most remarkable thing about this entire comparison. And it is where we return to the tent and the tree. Chapter 7. A tent on the Danube. A tree near the Neranjara River. Two men, 6 centuries and 4,000 miles apart, who never knew the other existed. Marcus Aurelius sat in his tent and wrote to himself, again, what he had written dozens of times before, that external things are not the problem, that existence flows like a river, that he could leave life right now and should let that determine everything. He wrote it not because the inside was new, but because the night was long and the plague was outside and the mind drifts, and the only corrective is repetition. He was, as Adol put it, someone in the process of training himself to be a human being. The Buddha sat under his tree and saw, again, what he had been pointing his monks toward for 45 years of teaching. That suffering has a structure, that the structure can be understood, that understanding, practiced daily, leads somewhere he called the cessation of suffering, somewhere Marcus never looked for and never needed to. They agreed about more than they disagreed about. Both saw that the mind is upstream of experience. Both discovered that philosophy not practiced daily is not philosophy at all. Both looked at impermanence and refused to flinch. Both built equanimity, though they built it with different materials and housed it in different architectures, and they disagreed about things that matter. What an emotion is, what a self is, what a human life is ultimately for. These are not trivial differences. They are the differences that make each tradition genuinely itself, and not a translation of the other. One ruled the known world. One sat under a tree. They reached the same conclusion. Sort of. And that sort of, the one we have been carrying since the beginning, is not a limitation. It is the most honest thing this video can offer you. Because the question both traditions leave you with is not, which tradition is right? It is not Stoicism or Buddhism. It is simpler and harder than that. What are you doing with your mind right now, in whatever tent you are sitting in? Marcus closed his journal. The oil lamp flickered. The Danube moved in the dark. The Buddha opened his eyes. The dawn light came through the leaves. The river moved in the light. 2 men, 2 rivers, 1 question.